Ladies and gentlemen, when we examine the intersection of criminal justice, media responsibility, and societal attitudes toward sexuality, there are few cases that illustrate the volatile mix of these forces more vividly than the one before us today. This is a story that begins with a seemingly routine episode of daytime television and ends with the irrevocable loss of a human life, a shattered family, a national outcry, and an enduring debate about the moral limits of entertainment. To understand its impact, we must carefully reconstruct the circumstances that led to this tragedy, analyze the choices made by those involved, and reflect upon the lessons that continue to resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. It began quietly in a Michigan neighborhood where two acquaintances lived in close proximity and occasionally socialized. One was a man in his early 30s, outgoing, warm, and deeply engaged in his local community. He had served in the military, had a wide network of friends, and was admired for his generosity, particularly in offering help to those marginalized or stigmatized by illness. His life, however, was not without difficulty. He struggled at times with personal demons, including substance abuse and emotional instability. But these challenges never extinguished his natural charm or his eagerness to connect with others. He was, above all, a person who believed in openness and authenticity, even when that openness carried risks in a society that was still grappling with its acceptance of same-sex relationships. Opposite him stood a younger man in his mid-20s, polite, reserved, and often described as well-mannered. Yet behind this outward presentation lay vulnerability. He carried a history of depression, health complications, and an unsettled family background. Those who knew him sensed fragility, and his life reflected the internal struggles he faced. It was within this context that a fateful opportunity emerged. A popular daytime talk show, emblematic of the 1990s appetite for sensational entertainment, advertised a segment seeking participants who wished to reveal secret admirers. The premise was simple. Invite unsuspecting individuals onto the stage, present them with the revelation of a hidden crush, and capture the reactions for a live audience. The formula promised humor, surprise, and dramatic television, but it also carried within it the seeds of humiliation and emotional danger. The older of the two men, an avid viewer of such programs, was drawn to the opportunity. He harbored feelings for his younger acquaintance, feelings he believed he could express in a public yet celebratory environment. When approached by the show's producers, he disclosed his secret and was assured that it would make for a lighthearted, entertaining segment. For him, the stage offered a chance not only to confess an attraction, but also to participate in the medium he so loved. He traveled to the studio, accompanied by a friend, filled with excitement and anticipation. Meanwhile, the producers extended their invitation to the other party, framing the encounter in a misleading manner. He was told, or at least led to believe, that the admirer might be a woman. This crucial detail set the stage for the rupture that was to come. When the day of filming arrived, the reveal played out before a live audience. The admirer spoke with playfulness, imagining scenarios of intimacy, describing fantasies that drew laughter from those in attendance. Behind the curtain, the object of this attention waited, unaware of what he would face. Upon his entrance, the truth was revealed. The admirer was not a woman, but the man seated before him, smiling nervously yet hopefully. The audience responded with amusement, but the young man's discomfort was palpable. He blushed, he covered his face, he insisted upon his heterosexuality. Cameras captured every moment, freezing his embarrassment for broadcast. Although he maintained composure on stage, the humiliation weighed heavily upon him. What followed in the days after is the heart of the tragedy. Just 3 mornings later, the younger man received a note that carried suggestive undertones. Believing it came from the admirer who had exposed him on national television, he felt cornered, mocked, and perhaps deeply conflicted about his own identity. His response was drastic. He withdrew money from a bank, purchased a shotgun, and drove to the home of the man who had confessed his attraction. There, after a brief exchange, he retrieved the weapon from his vehicle and fired 2 fatal shots into the other man's chest. The victim died instantly, Within minutes, neighbors had called for help, and the shooter himself phoned the police, his voice trembling as he confessed to what he had done. The story gripped the nation. Not only was it a crime of passion and violence, it was inseparable from the television spectacle that preceded it. Immediately, the conversation extended beyond the act itself to the environment that created the conditions for such a volatile outcome. The talk show faced searing criticism, accused of deception, exploitation, and recklessness. Commentators questioned the ethics of exposing deeply personal matters in pursuit of ratings. Others debated the culpability of the producers, wondering whether they bore responsibility for creating a humiliating situation that pushed a fragile man over the edge. The tragedy was no longer just about two individuals. It became a referendum on media ethics in an age of sensationalism. When the case moved into the courts, the complexities deepened. The shooter was charged with murder, and prosecutors argued that his actions were deliberate and premeditated. The defense, however, countered with claims of mental instability, citing a history of depression, physical ailments, and emotional fragility. They invoked a legal strategy, then known as the gay panic defense, arguing that the public humiliation of being revealed as the object of same-sex affection had provoked an uncontrollable emotional reaction. This defense was met with outrage from advocates who saw it as an attempt to excuse violence on the basis of prejudice. Nonetheless, the trial unfolded with the broadcast footage replayed repeatedly before the jury, forcing them to confront the disturbing link between entertainment and tragedy. Ultimately, the defendant was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The story did not end with the criminal trial. The family of the victim pursued civil action against the show and its parent company, arguing that the producers had engineered the circumstances that led directly to their loved one's death. The lawsuit alleged negligence, deception, and the deliberate creation of a dangerous emotional scenario for the sake of profit. The jury in that civil trial agreed, awarding the family a substantial sum in damages, a verdict that made headlines and sent shockwaves through the television industry. Yet this outcome was later overturned on appeal, as higher courts ruled that the show could not reasonably be held responsible for an unforeseeable criminal act. The reversal left the family without the compensation initially promised and reignited debate about freedom of expression versus responsibility for harm. The consequences for the talk show were nevertheless profound. Its reputation, once buoyed by provocative segments and lively entertainment, became irreparably tarnished. Producers introduced counseling protocols for guests, acknowledging the risks of emotional manipulation, but the damage was irreversible. Ratings declined, and the program was eventually canceled. The segment in question never aired in full, though snippets appeared in news broadcasts and court proceedings, forever embedding the images of laughter, embarrassment, and exposure into the public memory. The broader implications of this case ripple outward into several domains. First, it highlights the ethical dilemmas of media production. Daytime television of the 1990s thrived on sensationalism, often prioritizing shock value over the dignity of participants. The producers of this segment pursued entertainment without adequate regard for the psychological vulnerabilities of their guests. By manipulating expectations, by creating surprise at the expense of honesty, they played with human emotions, as though they were disposable tools of drama. The result was not just embarrassment, but a chain of events that ended in bloodshed. This raises pressing questions. How far should media be allowed to go in pursuit of ratings? Where should the boundaries of entertainment be drawn when human lives and identities are involved? Second, the case sheds light on the stigmatization of sexuality in that era. Although the 1990s marked progress in visibility for LGBTQ communities, they were also marked by persistent prejudice and discomfort in mainstream culture. The laughter of the studio audience at the revelation of a same-sex crush was not merely amusement. It reflected societal attitudes that treated homosexuality as comedic, shocking, or aberrant. The humiliation felt by the man on stage was amplified by these cultural undercurrents. His violent reaction, though inexcusable, must be understood within a society that often ridiculed or marginalized same-sex attraction. The tragedy thus becomes a lens through which to examine the human cost of stigma and the destructive power of shame. Third, the legal proceedings surrounding the case provide insight into the evolving landscape of justice. The invocation of the gay panic defense, though ultimately unsuccessful, underscored the persistence of prejudicial rationales within the courtroom. The reliance upon such arguments attempted to pathologize same-sex attraction, framing it as a provocation worthy of violence. This not only undermined justice for the victim, but also threatened broader societal acceptance of LGBTQ identities. The public backlash against the defense contributed to its eventual decline in American jurisprudence. But its use in this case remains a stark reminder of how prejudice can infiltrate even the legal system. Fourth, the civil litigation raised unprecedented questions about the responsibility of media institutions. Could a television program be held liable for the downstream actions of its participants? Did deception and manipulation amount to negligence? The initial jury verdict suggested yes, that entertainment corporations bore responsibility for the foreseeable emotional harm inflicted upon vulnerable individuals. The appellate reversal, however, reaffirmed protections of free speech and limited the scope of liability. This tension between accountability and freedom remains unresolved, and the case continues to be cited in discussions of media law and ethics. Beyond law and ethics, the case also resonates as a cultural marker. It became a symbol of the dangers of reality television long before the genre reached its peak. It demonstrated how entertainment that toys with people's lives can lead to outcomes far beyond the studio walls. It forced a society enthralled by tabloid-style programming to confront the human cost of its appetite for spectacle. And it remains a touchstone in documentaries, retrospectives, and debates about media responsibility. Even decades later, when platforms have multiplied and the hunger for shock content persists, the cautionary tale of this tragedy serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of unchecked exploitation. In reflecting upon this case, we must also acknowledge the enduring grief of the victim's family. Their loved one was more than a character in a media narrative. He was a person with dreams, flaws, kindness, and a life cut short in an instant. Their pursuit of justice, both criminal and civil, was not merely about accountability, but about affirming the dignity of someone reduced to a spectacle. Their voices remind us that behind the debates about law and media ethics lies a human story of loss and mourning. Meanwhile, the life of the perpetrator unfolded in prison for over 2 decades. His release on parole did not erase the crime or the pain it caused, but it raised further questions about rehabilitation, accountability, and the lasting consequences of a single act of violence. His silence in the years following his release speaks perhaps to the burden of infamy, the impossibility of escaping a past forever tied to a national controversy. This tragedy also invites us to consider how society has changed since the mid-1990s. Public attitudes toward sexuality have evolved significantly. Same-sex relationships are now more widely accepted, legally recognized, and publicly visible. The laughter that once accompanied a same-sex revelation on daytime television might today be met with celebration, or at least with greater respect. Yet, the persistence of discrimination, the dangers of humiliation, and the appetite for sensationalism remain. In the age of social media, where private lives are broadcast instantly and virally, the lessons of this case are more relevant than ever. The ethical imperative to protect dignity, to avoid exploitation, and to recognize the humanity of every individual has only grown more urgent. In conclusion, the story we have examined is not merely a tale of one crime or one television show. It is a prism through which to view the interplay of entertainment, prejudice, and justice. It asks us to confront the consequences of turning private truths into public amusement. It challenges us to reckon with the legal and ethical boundaries of media, And it calls us to remember the individual whose life was lost, ensuring that he is not reduced to a footnote in the history of sensational television, but honored as a person whose story carries lessons for us all. The case remains a cautionary tale, a reminder that when society sacrifices dignity for spectacle, it risks not only embarrassment, but irreparable harm. The responsibility lies with us, as citizens, as consumers of media, and as members of a culture that must decide where it will draw its lines between entertainment and exploitation, between curiosity and cruelty, between laughter and loss. Only by acknowledging these boundaries can we hope to prevent history from repeating itself in new forms upon new stages.